The Kyoshin, samurai warriors hailing from the mire, spiritual warriors who believe they have the spirit of yokai within them. They are flashy, bold, and excelled at anti-ganks and ganks alike. Today I will teach you in its entirety how to play Kyoshin. This guide will cover all basics, whether you're a new Kyoshin or someone who has several hundred hours in the character. There is always more to learn. First, we must go over the general feel of the character. Kyoshin is largely based off of defensive attacks. While he has some offensive tools, they are very limited. To truly excel at this character, you must learn to be patient with your opponent. Now, let's move on to the moveset, covering it in its entirety. Kyoshin has very simple attack chains that are easy to understand. They have every combination of lights and heavies. So for instance, they have light into light, light into heavy, heavy into heavy, and heavy into light. Another note is that all of Kyoshin's finishers are undodgeable. Kyoshin's opener lights also have the superior block property. Kyoshin also has a standard zone attack that comes from your left side and also chains into your finishers. He also has a forward dodge heavy that also leads into finishers. As with most heroes, Kyoshin also has a forward dodge bash that also leads into finishers. As with most bashes, it can be delayed up until 500 ms. Kyoshin also has a sprint attack. Now there's a good reason why all of Kyoshin's finishers are undodgeable. It's because Kyoshin has an in-chain bash. This bash, when landed, gives you a guaranteed light. This in-chain bash is accessible after everything I mentioned previously. Into a light, into a heavy, into your zone, into your forward dodge heavy, into your kick, and lastly, into your sprint attack. Now, the selling point of Kyoshin, his Kaze stance. Kaze stance is an all-guard that requires no stamina to maintain, and has several attacks from it. A light attack coming from your right guard that is not enhanced. A zone attack coming from your left guard that is enhanced. And a top unblockable that is feintable. Landing any attack from Kaze stance gives you Fujin cuts. 3 light attacks that are guaranteed. Also another attack accessible after any hit, whiff, or during Fujin cuts. To do this move, just press heavy attack after any of the previous mentioned attacks, and you will do Fujin Force. A heavy attack that is unfeintable comes from your right guard, but has superior block properties. Utilizing Fujin Force allows you to fast flow back into Kaze stance. Relating to Kaze stance and the final note of his basic kit, is you can fast flow into Kaze stance from any attack that isn't from Kaze stance. Next, we will go over Kyoshin's optimal punishes. Learning your character's punishes is important if you wish to master your character. So we will go over Kyoshin's guard break punish. On a standard guard break, you'll do a heavy from any side. For a heavy parry, you will do either a light or a zone attack. You do your light or zone depends on your enemy's health and your stamina. On a light parry, you get a heavy from any side. If your opponent is out of stamina and you throw them, you get a zone into heavy. If your opponent is out of stamina and you get a parry, you get 2 heavies. His punishes also apply if you are in revenge. That about covers the basics of Kyoshin's moveset. Next we'll move on to his feats, both unique and selectable. Now on to Kyoshin's feats. I will only be covering feats I feel are relevant, as some of them are complete non-factors when it comes to Kyoshin's kit. First, I will be covering all of his unique feats. For his tier 1, Kaguru, anytime you superior block an attack, your attacks will bleed. The superior blocks are, as mentioned previously, on the light attacks, on Fujin Force, and on Kazakhstan's itself. Kyoshin's tier 2 feat, Hikari More, functions similarly to his tier 1. His tier 2 grants lifesteal whenever superior blocking an attack. Kyoshin's unique tier 3 is Hikari Tokage. It activates your first and second feat and refreshes it whenever you superior block an attack. Kyoshin's last tier 4 is Mugen Hyoyu, an activatable feat that summons hands below your opponent to trap them. Opponents can dodge the move, but if they hit, they are trapped in it for a couple seconds, allowing you to score a free hit. And that's all for Kyoshin's unique feats. Next we will move on to his selectable feats, which I feel are usable. Arrow Strike is Kyoshin's tier 2 feat. It has a cast time and calls down an arrow to deal moderate damage to your enemy. For his tier 3, I would recommend picking Tough as Nails for sticky situations, as it gives you an entire block of health. Lastly is his tier 4 feat, Fear itself. It's a 40% damage increase for 20 seconds. Now we'll be moving on to more advanced techniques. I will teach you how to play the character in 1v1 situations or in 1vx situations. Before you move on to this section, I highly recommend going into the training menu to practice everything mentioned previously, just so you know what you're doing when you get into a fight with someone. In 1v1 situations, your main goal as Kyoshin is to utilize your mix-ups, obviously. But how do we go about doing that? As I mentioned previously in the beginning of this guide in the introduction section, Kyoshin is primarily a defensive character with small offensive tools. You want to utilize this to the fullest extent, utilizing your recovery cancels into Kaze stance to bait out enemy attacks and to punish things like dodge attacks, light interrupts, or whiffs. This can easily be achieved by doing your forward dodge heavy or backstepping attacks, purposely whiffing them, in that which your enemy will take the bait and attack you while you're still sitting in Kaze stance, giving you a free punish. Kaze stance is primarily a defensive tool that can be used offensively if you know what your opponent is going to do. For instance, if you know that your enemy is going to do a long wind-up attack, you can do your Kaze stance light to interrupt them as long as they don't have hyper armor. Kaze stance can also be entered from a block, so if your enemy hits you with an enhanced attack, you can fast flow into Kaze stance and immediately hit them with your light attack, giving you your 3 free Fujin cuts. Alternatively, if you enter one of your mix-ups, you can do your Kaze stance heavy, letting it fly. If your opponent dodge attack, you can easily follow up with Fujin Force to basically no-you them. Another good mix-up that was recently changed by the bash changes is your forward dodge bash. As mentioned previously, you can use it 100 ms into your dodge up to 500 ms. Your forward dodge kick is reactable on its own, but utilizing the different timings along with empty dodging it into a zone can really provide the pressure that you need. Other than that, you want to primarily be poking your opponent as Kyoshin. You want to be finding holes in their defense and their offense to poke them when they least expect it and interrupt them out of their offense so that they can't participate. Kyoshin's in-chain bash and heavy/light combo is a good mix-up tool as well if you get something like a guard break or you go into your kick mix-up. If you mix all of these together, your Kaze stance mix-up, your kick mix-up, and your in-chain mix-up, you can really throw your opponent off. As with most fighting games and For Honor alike, do not be predictable with these things. Mix them up. Sometimes you do the undodgeable light, sometimes you do the undodgeable heavy, sometimes you feint it. Sometimes you go into Kaze stance, sometimes you bait them with the Kaze stance so that they attack you, or you let something fly from it. Kyoshin has a lot of player expression, so basically play how you like. If you want to utilize your kick mix-up and your in-chain bash, go for it. If you're more of a flashy player and like to use Kaze stance, go for it. Obviously this doesn't cover all your bases when fighting as Kyoshin, as everything will basically be matchup dependent. Some characters will have hyper armor that you'll need to account for, while other characters will have chain lights that you'll want to block so that you can block their finisher with your Kaze stance by fast flowing. Now we will move on to general 4v4 tips. This is for ganking and anti-ganking. In 4v4s, Kyoshin generally plays the same, playing around his Kaze stance to bait out enemies' attacks so that he's able to get those crushing counters with his Kaze stance or hit people with Fujin Force. In general teamfight scenarios, you want to abuse your Kaze stance as much as possible, as well as using your crushing counter lights externally against opponents who are trying to attack you. Kyoshin's hitboxes are also nothing to scoff at either, both in Kaze stance and from neutral. You basically just want to throw your zone, your Kaze stance zone and light, and your finisher heavies in order to bait people into either dodging, getting into block stun, so that you can get into your Kaze stance if they tried to punish you. Be sure that if you land anything in Kaze stance, you delay your Kaze stance light so that you can more easily react to incoming attacks to land that Fujin Force. Fujin Force can also be target swapped, meaning that you don't necessarily have to be locked onto the person who is attacking you. This allows you to hit a random person in the team fight with an unexpected unblockable attack that they have to parry or dodge or just eat it straight up. Anti-ganking is basically the same thing, except you don't have any teammates to help you out if you get stuck. You still want to abuse your Kaze stance lights and your hitboxes as much as possible to put your enemies in block stun so that they can't attempt to start a gank or try to put you in a mix-up. And most importantly, do not go into anti-ganks thinking you're going to win. Try to stall as long as possible so that your teammates can come help you out if they even do. Now this part of the 4v4 section is going to take a little bit of explaining and learning. Ganking optimally is very important to winning fights and even matches. Ganks are generally easy to learn and Kyoshin has fairly easy ones. This is the part of the video where I said that it would be a little complicated and a little advanced. It's okay if you do not understand, and if you aren't prepared for that, you can feel free to skip the ganking section. However, if you are choosing to stay here, I will be showcasing how to do the ganks. The first and most generic gank is the double bash gank. This is where Kyoshin will be initiating the gank, and it's essentially you do your kick into your light, into your in-chain bash. So I will demonstrate it as so. Just like so. This is going to be if Kyoshin is the one not initiating, so this is for characters like Orochi who have double bashes. It's the same premise as before, except you're getting double heavies. Now for a Kyoshin specific gank, your teammate will guard break the enemy, you will be in Kaze stance, and you'll do your Kaze stance heavy, and all of your Fujin cuts. Your teammate will get a free heavy, and they will go into their finisher heavy, and you will GB to confirm it. Now these are obviously not every single gank you can do with Kyoshin. These are just the basics and fundamentals. These are the ganks that you'll be using most often in 4v4s when you're ganking with a teammate. For more in-depth guides on ganking, I highly recommend checking out ZZ Explorer and Datboy AD. They both go more in depth with Kyoshin ganks, including with characters like Centurion and Hatun that have specific ganks. and generally their content is just very informational when it comes to ganking, so I highly recommend going to both of their channels just to check it out. Now that about covers everything I can provide you, so now I'm going to switch it over to my friend Professor, who is a high-level Kyoshin player who actively participates in tournaments. He's going to cover everything I did not and provide advanced tips that might help you in a fight. This includes things like tech that are not actively explained inside of the game, or just hidden knowledge that you might not know from the surface.
Hello, Cloaker's class. I am Professor POV. I'd like to thank Mr. Cloaker for the guest lecture opportunity. Today we're going to talk about Kyoshin and a couple of fun things to do with him. The first thing I'm going to talk about is, your good neutral mix-ups. Then I'm going to talk about some hitbox stuff. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little more in depth about the light on block technique. So first off, what I want to talk about is the neutral mix-up. You can either forward dodge bash, which is when they stand still, very obvious, forward dodge zone, or forward dodge heavy. Now the other two options have their own unique cases to them. So I'll start with the forward dodge zone. The forward dodge zone is useful so when people buffer dodges when they see you dodge forward. So if you dodge forward and they're instantly dodge attacking, or they are instantly dodging, like pre-dodging, what you can do is you can forward dodge zone and it will catch those things when a GB wouldn't, or things like that. Now for the forward dodge heavy, this is for people who kind of dodge on a little bit more movement. So if you forward dodge heavy and enter into Kaze stance, you will catch their dodge attacks because it is fast enough. Because Kyoshin's entry speed into Kaze is a little bit slow. That's why those are the two separate use cases I would use. So it's all about your opponent. The second thing I wanted to talk about is, so if people are starting to catch on that you dodge forward heavy and do your Kaze stance, they'll start GBing you because you can't do anything fast enough out of your Kaze stance to beat the GB. However, what you can do then is that your forward dodge heavy is also a chain starter. So if people are just trying to GB after they dodge your dodge forward heavy, you can do your chain heavy and they eat 30 damage because of the chain links, it's GB invulnerable. So if people are starting to dodge and GB, just throw the finisher heavy. So next I want to talk about hitboxes. Kyoshin got a really nice hitbox buff recently. So they are bigger than you think they are. So you can kind of swing a little wildly as long as I don't have anyone who can punish that. And you're gonna probably hit somebody. Especially with the Kaze light and the Kaze zone, which includes the follow-ups. So if someone's on your right, when you get a full block, you can light, or if they're on the left, you can zone. And it will hit them most of the time. His neutral zone, so the zone that you just do, has a really big hitbox alongside his side heavies. So they're very safe. His attacks also have a lot of forward movement on them. So if someone's far away from you, you can space them out with attacks like your full block light. You would be shocked about how much forward movement and reach that move has. The last thing is light on block. I know Cloaker touched on this shortly, but I feel like it is important to go into because it is such a skill thing for Kyoshins to do, and not a lot of them do it. But the light on block is a shorthand for a sequence of things. So as you enter block stun from something, you can fast flow to Kaze stance. And so if you buffer a light input after doing that, you can do a very quick light attack that can interrupt a lot of chains. This is a very useful tool, as a lot of people don't know about it. Now, it is hero dependent. Sometimes you can interrupt a chain heavy and sometimes you can't. For example, Warden or Fira, you cannot do light on block with them, but other heroes like JJ or Zanhu, you can do it too. That is just a matchup thing you have to learn about. But the only way to stop it if they do get interrupted by it is to feint to parry. So it forces people to feint to neutral against you when they don't want to. So once you start experimenting with light on block and doing more and more things with it, you're going to be a much better Kyoshin. It is overall a very, very important part of your toolkit that you almost need to learn to pass up to the higher level of Kyoshin play. Well, thank you all for tuning into this guest lecture. My name is, again, Professor POV. If you want to check me out, I have my own channel. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening, and thank you, Cloaker, for having me.
And that about does it for the full Kyoshin guide. Shout out to Professor POV for helping me with this video, and overall just being a chill guy. Feel free to check him out on YouTube. I'll put the link to his YouTube channel in the description, along with the 2 people that I mentioned previously in the guide for the Ganks section. The link for that will also be in the description for both of their channels, and also to the link to the Kyoshin specific Ganks. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another video. Peace.